The fight for control of the Republican National Committee. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. If you have been paying attention to headlines, you know that there is a battle brewing over who will lead the RNC for the next couple of years. Ronna McDaniel has come under a lot of criticism from conservatives in America, from political leadership, from RNC members themselves who think that the Republican National Committee is due for a leadership change. And of course, the left-leaning media is eating this up because they're painting it in as brutal of terms as possible. Before I get into all that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts, at washingtontimes.com. Just go to the newsletter section, find my name, click on it, and sign up for my 3 times a week newsletters at the Washington Times. Contains all my commentaries as well as my twice weekly Tuesdays and Thursdays Bold and Blunt podcasts. And one more mention, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, so forth and so on. Listen to this from the Associated Press, a report on the internal battles at the RNC for the next Republican chair. Inside the ugly fight to become the next Republican chair. That's the headline. It goes on to say, struggling to unify after another disappointing election, the Republican National Committee is consumed by an increasingly nasty leadership fight as the GOP navigates its delicate relationship with former President Donald Trump. Wow, could they get more anti-conservative mentions in just the 3-line lead than that? They talked about the Republican National Committee, infighting there, the despicable President Donald Trump, they brought him in there. They talked about the GOP is in itself in some sort of turmoil. I mean, read just the lead on this, which is about the attention span of the average American reader, right? I mean, this is the Twitter nation now. This is the Twitter generation. Read just the lead, and it seems as if Republican Party is in utter turmoil. Well, you know what? Here's what it is. There are a lot of conservatives out there who steadfastly support Donald Trump. There are a lot of Republican leaders out there who do not. And this is sort of the internal battle that has been biting at the heels of the Republican Party for a very long time. Go back in time to the Tea Party, right? When you had patriotic American conservatives fed up with the spending on Capitol Hill being pushed by Democrats, but with the partnership of willing Republicans. And so there was sort of an uprising where the Democrats and their water carriers in the mainstream media happily, gleefully spoke about sort of this destruction, this internal crumbling of the Republican Party. It wasn't true. It was just a course correction where conservatives in America rose up and reminded the Republicans on Capitol Hill, in some cases who had been there so long that they forgot what it was like to work actual jobs. They reminded them that, hey, you work for me. And so it's sort of the same thing when Donald Trump came along in 2015, 2016, when he was making headway, when he was gathering steam on his campaign. He was reminding the entrenched Republican class, the elitist Republican class, the Republicans who had been on Capitol Hill for a very long time and think that they know better than average Joe and Jane American how politics are run. They believe that politics are behind closed door dealings, and the public only gets to see behind those closed doors when deals are made. And American citizens, especially conservative American citizens, realized that the root of this nation was founded on the idea that the government works for the people. And so governing behind closed doors just ain't cutting it according to constitutional provisions. And so Donald Trump came along and he broke through that wall between the Beltway crowd, Capitol Hill, and the rest of America. And he sort of said to the people in the rest of America who had been feeling disenfranchised by their Republican representatives who have served for very many years in some cases, he sort of said to them, hey, I'll fight for you. I'll fight for America First principles. I'll fight for all those conservative principles that those politicians you have elected over the years said they would fight for, but then went to Capitol Hill and forgot to fight for. So there was that sort of internal discussion, if you will, more like internal debates and internal fighting about who controls the Republican Party, the Trump types or the Mitch McConnell types, the former John McCain types, the Mitt Romney types, the types that think they know better than you and me how to run the political system in America. And this has been going on for a very long time in the Republican Party, over a decade, right? There's been this sort of grappling over, are we controlled by the government and our elected leaders, or are we really controlled by the citizens of the United States? And things have really been heating up, first under Barack Obama, where you saw how perilous the country can come to losing its constitutional compass when political leaders on Capitol Hill allow a president to run roughshod over the Constitution by swinging about a pen and a cell phone and governing by dictate more than by congressional mandate and rule of law. And now, under this current Joe Biden feckless administration, we're seeing Barack Obama, the third term, only on steroids because there's no accountability at all. Joe Biden can't withstand accountability. He's not even there. He's busy calling out dead people at press conferences. So he can't be held accountable for his actions. Besides, he has 2 more years. So 2 more years with Joe Biden at the helm, a lot of damage can be done there. So here we are, the RNC, looking at new leadership, and the mainstream media is just rubbing its hands in glee. Oh, the Republican Party is dying. Oh, the Republican Party is fighting within itself. The Republican Party is going to be torn asunder, divide and conquer. And all the Democrats are giggling and pretending as if their party hasn't gone through that same sort of internal struggling. For instance, when DNC chair Tom Perez years ago said Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist with the biggest mouth, the mostest of mouth, is going to be the new direction of the Democrat Party. And when she went to Capitol Hill and ticked off all the leadership and entrenched Democrats there, and Nancy Pelosi had to step in and say, whoa, wait a minute, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you fire your loudmouth staff member and be a little quiet, and we will get you some of your socialist principles, some of your socialist proposals passed. I don't know about the internal meeting that Pelosi had with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I only know that after this meeting, which was broadly and widely reported in the press, that suddenly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's dictatorial, tyrannical, fascist office staffer left, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez quieted down for a little while. So I can only imagine that Nancy Pelosi told her to hush her mouth and just allow the adults in the Democrat Party to go forward and legislate and steal individual liberties, as they had been quietly doing behind the scenes for some time. They didn't want Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming in and mucking things up by openly stealing citizens' individual liberties. They were quite happy to keep doing it behind scenes quietly. So back to this fight at the RNC over the leadership. Ronna McDaniel says she has the votes to serve another couple years as chief. But Harmeet Dhillon is coming on strong. Harmeet Dhillon, one of the most important attorneys in America. She served as a former Trump campaign attorney. She has a law firm and does wonderful, marvelous work on behalf of constitutional causes in America, free speech and so forth, reeling back big tech, fighting for individual liberties in America. Well, she's coming on strong and gathering quite a bit of support to take on McDaniel for chair of the Republican National Committee. MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell also announced he is running for chair of the RNC. But look, no matter who wins, let's hope that there is some cleanup, some change for the better that takes place when this election is finished, when the new RNC chair is seated. From Fox News, let me just read a little bit from this report. Country star John Rich slammed the Republican National Committee following a report from conservative media outlet Red State about purported lavish expenditures amid an election season that turned out terribly for the grand old party. The Red State report claimed data showed the RNC spent tens of thousands of dollars at clothing retailers and large amounts on NFL tickets and private plane travel. Of course, the RNC is pushing back on these claims of frivolous expenditures, calling them half-truths, cherry-picked data, and so forth and so on. And it may be. I mean, honestly, sometimes you have to spend money on events. And then if you start looking through the data and you see, say, $25,000 spent on food or banquets, well, those actually may be justified expenditures, but maybe not. An email sent to RNC members, Fox News goes on to report, and obtained by Fox News, described the Red State report as a gross misrepresentation of how the RNC raises and spends money for the Republican Party. Okay, so there's the denials and so forth. There's the due diligence about presenting the other side. But here's the thing. Republicans don't need to give Democrats and their friends in the Democrat-controlled media any more fodder to point fingers at how divided the Republican Party is. It's time to unify. It's time to unify under the umbrella of conservative principles, whether it's Donald Trump saying those conservative principles, whether it's Ron DeSantis saying those conservative principles, whether it's Mitt Romney saying those conservative principles. So long as they're conservative principles that represent the limited government ideal that the Republican Party is supposed to carry forward. So long as those principles are rooted in conservatism, it's time to unify. And if change of leadership at the RNC is what's going to get the Republicans in part to unify, then let's do it. All for it, right? My guest today, Harmeet Dhillon, is here to discuss what she envisions as chair of the RNC and how she plans to unite and bring back accountability through reform. Harmeet, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So I'm just curious about the logic that led you to run for the chair of the RNC. Was there something that just was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, or has this just been something you've been brewing over a while?
I would say that there have been calls for change at the RNC at least for the last 2 years. I think a lot of members were very dissatisfied with the results of the 2020 election, and there was a push for some changes at the treasurer level at the RNC at that time. And, unfortunately, we kept with the same team, which I think has led to ultimately no changes in strategy in 2020 to 2022 and more losses at the polls. The leadership there, has a lot of answers, blame, and, reasons why it's not anybody's fault. And that may be, but, just generally speaking, there needs to be accountability. There needs to be a move to inspire our voters, our candidates, our donors, that things are going to be different at the RNC. There needs to be a renewed focus on how we win elections mechanically, including ballot harvesting, ballot curing, and early voting in states where that's legal. Much as I don't like some of these practices, you have to work to change them before you can simply, declare that they're inappropriate. You can declare they're inappropriate, but unless you have the ability to change the law, those comments are meaningless. And so I do think that in some states, Florida has really mastered the early voting game. California, in our targeted races, we've been able to use ballot curing and ballot harvesting and early voting to push Republican ballots to the ballot box, which is great. We're not seeing that effort or that leadership at the national level.
Have you seen the reports that just came out? Red State posted some of the FEC filings about the RNC's expenditures since 2017, and it's difficult to say if all the millions that they say that the RNC has been spending is frivolous, but certainly some of them. $5,000 spent in 2022 at Lululemon, the athletic retail store, and it was classified as an office expense. How concerned are you about the RNC spending, and how would you address that?
Well, I'm deeply concerned about it. RNC is hitting back hard, claiming this is all fake news. And there is, at a minimum, sloppy accounting. There is, at a minimum, money spent on things that are not appropriate to be spent on with donor dollars. And at a minimum, I think we have a RNC that is really increasingly out of touch with the people we are meant to represent. Yes, it's not a democracy. This is a representative body. It represents grassroots activist Republicans. And I think we're losing them with our failure to understand how our Marie Antoinette spending looks to the voters. I don't think we should be spending money on a lot of these things. I think that there's a need for belt-tightening. So I would do things differently. We need to have a top-to-bottom review of FAT consultant and vendor agreements. We need to have a top-to-bottom review of our priorities, of how we focus on winning elections. And look, I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is at least I have the questions. The questions are not being asked at the RNC right now, and that gives me great concern as a volunteer that we aren't going to be seeing change needed to win elections in 2024. We're not just here to sort of pat each other on the back, blow money on tchotchkes and candles and fancy coffee, and then keep losing. It doesn't work for me. It works for consultants, by the way. A lot of them get paid no matter what we do and how we do it, and it's just not working for us.
Yeah, it just seems like the RNC for a very long time has sort of represented the elites in the party over the real patriotic conservatives in America. And you saw this especially when they either attacked Trump or dismissed Trump, and that did pretty much the same in midterm elections where they ignored Trump candidates. How do you see that?
That is not something that can be laid solely at the feet of the RNC, okay? We have, multiple alphabet organizations in D.C., NRCC, NRSC, leadership funds of leaders. But what we definitely have is, at the RNC, I think we just have taken our eye off the ball of all of the changes that have occurred in election laws over the years, and we haven't kept up. And so, we don't directly fund Senate or congressional candidates for the most part, but we do fund states. We do fund grassroots efforts in the states, and we do fund priorities. We do training of states. We provide regional political directors. We provide field staff in targeted races. And if those staff and those resources are not also equipped with up-to-date technology, up-to-date messaging, leadership, or if we're futilely supporting candidates who we let the Democrats pick for us, and we did not do our own part to make sure that we define our candidates and help them. It's an exercise in futility. And so I am just, really concerned about the direction of the party. I can't control the bad choices that were made by the Senate leadership in refusing to support some America First candidates. I can't control the feckless way in which we did not perform according to what our expectations were with the so-called red wave in the Congress. But what I can do as a member of the RNC is move forward towards a better and reformed RNC, and I think that's what we need.
And could you just list some of the specific actions you would take, and especially about ensuring election integrity?
We have to aggressively work to change the laws to laws that help us have transparency and accountability as to who's on the voter rolls and who's voting. We don't have that right now in America. That's an ongoing focus. But what we do have is changed laws in the wake of 2020 and COVID, and even before that in some states. And we really haven't changed our strategies. So I think there has to be an absolute focus on ballots as opposed to votes, and getting ballots into the ballot boxes early and completely. That has to be relentless. It has to be funded, if not by the RNC, at least by outside groups that the RNC in some legal way works with. That's what the Democrats do. The Democrats do not do all their spending through the DNC. They do it through a host of outside organizations, including nonprofits, who are obviously acting in a partisan fashion. They do litigation on behalf of the Democratic side. Democratic donors give not just to the DNC, but to this constellation of outside organizations. And I don't see us talking about that. I don't see us trying to build it. I don't see us competing effectively. So these are some of the things that I would do to change our focus on election integrity.
Now, what would happen to your law practice and your fight through the legal system for constitutional rights? Because you are one of the few attorneys who are fighting on the conservative side of things for constitutional laws. What happens there should you win?
What happens is I have a law firm of 22 attorneys, and I am, well set up to take a leave of absence from our firm for 2 years and then move forward to work exclusively on the RNC. So obviously, that is a full-time job, more than a full-time job. I also am the head of a nonprofit called the Center for American Liberty, and the Center for American Liberty itself has staff, executive director, senior litigation counsel. They too will do just fine with me taking the leave for 2 years to do this job with the RNC. And so that's how strongly I feel about it, though, is that I think that we cannot afford to keep losing like we have been. And I don't think that, I can put my own personal interest above that of winning elections.
Do you know Ronna McDaniel personally? Have you followed her work through the RNC, and do you have specific criticisms that you would specifically address as RNC chair?
I've worked with her for the last 6 years. I've been frank with her about my concerns. We've had a good working relationship. This is not a personal issue for me. It's become very personal in the chair's race, unfortunately. Some personal attacks anonymously levied against me by a partisan of Ronna, obviously. If not her campaign itself, I do not know because they're anonymous. But what I do know is that it cannot be about personality. We should not be voting for leadership of the RNC based on friendship. And, for me, it's not personal at all. I'm sure she's a good person, and I'm sure she did her best. But at this point, the best is not good enough, and we need a different approach. And, there may have been many members of the RNC perfectly capable of stepping up and handling these things, and they have not. And so I'm prepared to step forward, prepared to help, prepared to do my best to help in this effort, and I don't think we can afford not to make a change. That's why I'm doing it.
Now, I know you put on Twitter that you had discussions with key members in the conservative movement who are on board with your run. At the same time, McDaniel says she already has the votes to win again. Have you done the numbers yourself? Have you been head counting and so forth? And do you feel optimistic at your chances at this point still?
Here's where the head count is. A lot of people listed by Ronna as her supporters are not, in fact, supporting her, so that's one point. I think her numbers are dropping. I know her numbers are dropping. My numbers are increasing. I've only been in this race for less than 2 weeks, but the momentum is going our way, and there are more than 40 days left to go. So what I see is that we are going to be hearing from a host of constituents at the RNC, big donors, small donors, voters, politicians. I've heard from all of those constituents. They don't like what they see. And so you cannot win a race if you're not in it. I started at 0, and I'm way above that today. And so the momentum is definitely shifting in our direction.
What do you think should have happened for Republicans in the midterms? Well, you saw the headline same as I did. Red wave was coming, red tsunami. It was less than that. Do you think we should have had a red wave, and under different leadership at the RNC, would we have seen that?
Oh, I definitely think that if we had a red wave, people would not be asking for change. I would not be asking for change. So, yeah, I mean, it's all about winning or losing elections pretty much.
And is there anything else that you want to point out, the differences between what you would do as chief of the RNC versus what's taking place now?
I think I've covered it. I expect to learn. I expect to listen quite a bit. I expect to bring a lot of younger people into the party. I have a lot of client relationships and friendships with a host of people across the conservative movement. And I think that that's necessary. Some turnover is necessary. We have a lot of consultants running the building who've been burrowed in there for, better part of a decade, and I think they need to go. I have promised a top-to-bottom review of consulting and vendor contracts at the RNC, and I think that's really overdue. So these are some of the things I would do to change if I were the chair.
Harmeet Dhillon, I really appreciate your time on Bold and Blunt, and I look forward to seeing how this race turns out. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care. Goodbye.
The vote for the RNC chair takes place in January, so we don't have to wait long to see how it turns out. New year, perhaps, new face at the RNC. I want to thank you for listening. Remind you that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts, at washingtontimes.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.